Yeah, I think we've got everybody. So are we good? Recording and live?
So we did
Are
do
we
it.
shifting that we're in the frame?
Now everybody's in.
All right. So I would like to open this meeting at 7:04. This is the Solar Project Subcommittee. And we'll start by doing a short roll call. We'll just go across the table. So,
Betsy Janeway? Craig Fournier?
Dave Hemingway.
Dan Nudd.
Marty Bender.
All right, and so those are our members from this. We do have a public here and also our town administrator assistant. So the things that we wanted to cover are, of course, the pilot, which we have a packet here for all of you. But before we do that, I want to go through the minutes and get those taken care of. So there are 3 different minutes. To summarize for other people out there, it was the last of the Zoom meeting that we had, which was April 20th. And that was just before the walk with Rick Vanderpool, talking that we would have that walk. The second one is June 22nd, which was when Rick Vanderpool came and presented his findings. We did not have a quorum, but we did have his presentation continue. And that is recorded and up on our YouTube stream for people to find. And then also last month's, which was the second non-quorum from July 27th. And that was when we were going to talk about the pilot, which we will instead be talking about today, since we did not have a quorum and therefore could not conduct business. So I will give the members here a moment to refamiliarize themselves with our minutes, and then I will take motions to accept or amend them. There we go. I knew I had one. I couldn't remember what it was. The line 20, so April 20th, the line 26 on the first page, Sue Roth's name is misspelled. Are there any further changes to the original April 20th meeting?
I move we accept all 3 minutes.
With the,
We're just talking
with
about.
that spelling correction change?
Yeah, with the spelling correction change, yes.
All right, do I have a second for
I'll
that?
second it.
Seconded by Marty. All in favor? Aye.
Well, I wasn't there.
All right, so that takes care of the minutes, which moves us on to our packet and today's main topic, which is the pilot. For anyone that may not be completely familiar with that, it stands for Payment in Lieu of Taxes, and that is an agreement in this case between the town and Hopkinton Solar LLC, which is the legal entity name of Deer Meadow Solar, and being represented and most of the work being done by Olivewood Energy. So you may hear all 3 of those different terms as we discuss things. They are all referring to the same thing, even if they're not all legally the same name. What you all can see in front of you is an amended and restated payment in lieu of taxes agreement. The first thing that I would note is that the black portions, including the striked out part, are already signed and executed between the town and Hopkinton Solar. And yes, thank you, Russ, for going to make sure our public gets the spare copy. I apologize, I should have thought of that earlier. And so that is already signed in effect and legally binding. And that was signed in 2019 by then Chair Schofield, I believe. Do I have the signing in front of me? I do not, but that signed version is available on the Solar Subcommittee website, top left in the links.
So everything's in black.
That's what's in black. The red that you see in front of you is, of course, there are some things that are strike through, and then the underlined red. A strike through is removed, the underlined is added or changed, and that, of course, changes things such as dates and addresses, for example, of their facility. And as we get down further, the estimated amounts for the pilot itself per year, those sorts of things. The main change that you're going to see are twofold. One is in the first, you start seeing it on the first page, and that is where it says HS, or Hopkinton Solar, will construct the Webster portion on land. It will. And then it's got purchase, and it mentions tax and map lots and parcels. And then there are 3 additions. That is for the expanded scope of the project. And so the 3 that you see in red, which are the trust, the holdings, and 910, those 3 parcels are currently not under any existing pilot agreement, whereas those that you see in number 1 are already covered under the existing pilot agreement. The second notable change that you're going to see is going to be
One other thing.
yes.
I know where the property 2 and 3 are. I don't know where property 4 is. Does anybody have any idea where that property is?
I do if you want.
Yeah.
That's the one that actually is off of the cleared area between the power line and that cleared area. That's that parcel there. That's where the substation will be.
Oh, the substation, okay. And do you
Thank
know the owners, or?
The Gammons, I don't know them. They are from Connecticut, I believe.
Okay.
And I'm happy to go into all of the details. I hope we do that further. I just want to cover the changes first to point them out. The second major change that you're going to see is in the construction term, which is number 3. And that updates the amount. And to make this make sense, the construction term is basically a year's worth of pilot payment. And so that is being updated to match the third major change, which is the payment in lieu of taxes schedule that you see in number 4. And so that is increased to match those, which go up in proportion to the amount of larger megawatt size that they are expecting to include on our properties. And you can see for example, the first year goes up to 204,000 from previously was 84,000, and year 40 goes up to $534,393 from what would have been $220,000. And following that, number 9, which is the current use. The pilot is in lieu of current use, so there is no current use assessed or applied, but they are the same percentages apply. They are doing the same thing to up that from 53,000 to 97,000 and change. So those are the major changes that are in the document. And while I definitely want to talk about those, one of the biggest questions has been, is this actually a good deal for the town? Does it make sense for the town? We were able to obtain the chart that you see in the next section from Concord. And they have provided this to give us a context for what things look like. And to briefly mention the expected, or I should say the way that our pilot was laid out. It was laid out at a $3,000 per megawatt amount with a 2.5% escalator per year. And you can actually see that listed most of the way down this chart. There are a couple things to look at on this chart. One is the big outlier, and that is the first one that's here, so that we can absolutely make sure that we see it. That's Antrim and Antrim Wind Energy. Due to it being the nature of wind, though they, I believe, also have some solar at the site, they are at a much higher dollar per megawatt value, along with the 2.5% annual increase. But there is a second kicker in that their power purchase agreement is much older and allows them to gain a larger amount of money for the power they sell. And so that's why it makes it actually worth more as a wind farm than, even if they were to construct it now, it's worth more at that point in time. Moving down, you'll see Conway's, and the most important note there was that that project was not built. It was set up, they signed an agreement, a pilot agreement, but they did not end up building the project. And if you look at the right side, one of the most notable portions there, and you'll see this a little bit further down as we go through them, is that they're listing 3,500 megawatts, 3,500 per megawatt for community solar, and then 2,500 per megawatt for ISO New England solar. And to briefly explain the difference, community solar is basically they produce the power and sell it to us, and we consume it, so they become our energy provider. With ISO New England, they sell to the electric wholesale market. And what you'll find, for example, on the others, as we go down through Franklin and Hinsdale's, sorry, not Hinsdale's, and especially like Lebanon's, as you go down through these, you're going to find that your smaller ones, for capacity especially, but even several of your others, you'll see that they're like 3,500 per megawatt, and that's because they are either directly net metered offset, or they are community solar. And so that would be, for example, if our town-owned municipal solar array, if another company was doing it and owning it instead of the town, this would be how that would have been done. So again, that's what helps give it a higher value, because it's a more immediate and full quality price for the electric that it produces. And you'll see, for example, Lebanon's, theirs is higher. Theirs is actually one that's similar to what most non-solar pilots are like, and theirs is based on gross revenues. And that's the Lebanon project at the bottom of the first page.
This is based on what?
Gross revenues. If you look at the right-hand side, it tells you what the pilot amount is like. And so the long and short of this is that most of these things, if you see them with, say, 3,500 or so per megawatt, which is, of course, above the 3,000 per megawatt that we're looking at, they are, in general, the smaller community solar And so they're not selling wholesale into the standard ISO New England grid, which of course makes the project worth a lot less, and they would be taxed a lot. Makes their projects worth more because their revenues and their income would be that much higher if they weren't under a pilot agreement. So that's the 3500s. You'll also, however, notice that those do not have escalators on them. And the majority are around the 3000, either with or without, but most of the 3000s, for example, with Milford, are proposed, Hopkinton's proposed. They have that 2.5% escalator, and this predates the large program that was just announced to the north, and I am blanking on exactly where that was at the moment, but they were also presented. It's again Olive Wood Energy that is doing it. They were also presented the same standard 3,000 per megawatt with a 2.5 annual increase. So the first question of, is this a reasonable amount compared to other projects that are similar? I believe, looking at the data, that it probably is, but I'd like to hear what other people think from looking at the data, and if you have questions about the data.
Yeah, I was a little I was a little nervous, let's say, before I saw the actual data.
Mhm.
But once I look at the data, I think it's a fair price. I like the 2.5 annual increase. I think that's a big, down the line, that's a big win.
Mhm.
So I think it's reasonable. I don't think we're out of the ballpark here. That's my opinion.
Okay. Do either of you have comment on this?
Go ahead.
Have we got any input from Olive Wood on what their gross revenue will be? Because I question, they presented us with this, correct me if I'm wrong, I wasn't there 2 years ago, but they noticed Milford's exactly the same, and they did that solar project. They presented us with this, and I'm not saying it's unfair. I'm just saying it would be interesting to see what their projected gross revenue is, and then we could do a percentage of what that is to figure out how much the 204,000 is, to get an idea, because that's going to be based on how much they make per kilowatt, whether it's straight ISO rate or whether they're going to get REX credits, or how they're going to sell their power, for what price I should say they're going to sell their power. So I would be interested in that. I'm not saying this is unfair, I just would be very curious in what their projected gross revenue is, and I'm guessing to build a facility this big, they must have some idea of how much they're going to make.
I would certainly assume so and hope so. While I was not part of the process for the original pilot, I will say that the original pilot was set to be done without an escalator, and after the first public hearing here, I believe it was Michael Borak went back with the folks in Hopkinton, and they sat down and they crafted it with the escalator. So the escalator has been added since the original proposition from Olive Wood. I don't have further context for that.
Well, just from the date, the Milford one was after the 11/19 of 2019, so perhaps they carried that escalator to Milford, which is why it's
Yeah.
the same.
Basically, what we agreed with is what they've been at the time, is what they've been presenting to everybody for all of their projects as they move forward.
So I think you're right about, maybe tying it to the power output or gross revenue or something. But calculating that's hard. I mean, how do you get that info?
Mm-hmm.
And this agreement is pretty straightforward. I mean, anybody in town can understand this thing.
Well,
That's true.
If you know how much you're going to make a kilowatt, I would argue it's not hard at all, because it'd be your kilowatts times 24 hours times 365, and then you need to know how much solar makes on a given year, which is typically 12 to 15%. And I'd welcome Dawn to come back and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 12 to 15% is a fair for a commercial solar application. So if you knew the price per kilowatt or the price per megawatt they were getting, you could get a reasonable idea of the gross revenue. I mean, it's gonna
Yeah.
vary.
Right. So I guess that brings up the question, do we have to sign this right now? I mean,
We don't
Right.
have to sign this right now, no.
well, like,
So
I mean,
the,
just following up on what you're saying is, you know, they're gonna have to go before the site evaluation committee, and the site evaluation committees, they're gonna have to present all their info about the finances for this, are they qualified to produce this, what's their, you know, we might be able at that point to get a hold of the rate that they're paying, or they're getting for their power that they're selling on the grid.
so they should already have a power purchase agreement. So they should know what that rate is expected to be.
And how long does that rate stay? I mean, it's.
It
isn't-
varies.
Yeah, I mean, so like,
Part of that is also, for example, if you look at the Antrim one that's up there, one of the huge things that was different for them versus others is their power purchase agreement was old and still valid for the remaining entirety of the project. So they were getting a lot more per kilowatt hour than any current project would ever get. So that's one of those reasons why it's an outlier. And you know, I agree, it would be nice to see that data. And to, before we continue with other comments on this, to your point of do we need to sign this, the answer is no, and we don't actually sign it. The process that I'm hoping to follow with this is that we get to go over, discuss the pilot, decide whether we think it is reasonable or not, or have other specific information that we want to consider before deciding that, and then have the solar subcommittee make a recommendation to the select board. It is ultimately the select board who will decide through public hearing whether to accept or deny this pilot agreement.
Well, if, let's say we put this aside, we don't assign it, we don't do
Mhm.
anything, is the previous agreement is still in effect, right?
Correct.
They can give us 84,000 and say we're good to go, right?
On the properties that were already covered.
Oh,
On the properties that are not covered, which are the additional new properties that you see
right.
on the
and
first
right there,
page here, those are not covered by that previous pilot agreement. So they would either be getting taxed as a business for that, which I believe they still would be, because these are payments in lieu of taxes to the town. And we don't go out and collect a business tax directly. And so in those three instances, if they constructed without that pilot update, which they probably wouldn't, most of the time, if there's no pilot, there's no agreement, no construction,
Right,
no
they-
project.
They can't
But-
go to
but
their
if-
investors and say, you know, this
Correct.
is what it is.
But if they were to do that without us taking this pilot, they might be able to say, well, it's a risk on those three properties, but it's gonna be worth it or not. If they decided it was ultimately worth it, then the property that they were installing on all of these properties would then get added as value to the property's tax cards, and all of these individuals would be paying that as property tax. So this makes it so that the company is paying for the company's assets on those properties. Now,
So they
in the,
probably, as you were saying, they probably wouldn't go ahead in that case.
it highly depends on their lease and whether they wanted to make the landowners really unhappy or not. But I would assume that it would not happen at that point.
I would, this is a question directed to you, but I'd like to hear what Mr. White has to say, if he has the same thing.
Sure.
Just curious, as to what would these properties generate as taxes all by themselves today? What, in other words, what are they generating that we're getting the 200,000 versus what?
So I don't have their tax cards in front of me. Some of the properties are in current use, some of them are not. The ones that are in current use will, if I were to assume that all of these properties were in current use, maybe we get $200 worth of taxes. If they are not in current use, it's probably closer to 3,000 or 4,000 in taxes. And to be clear, the pilot does not cover the entire parcel. The pilot only covers the portion of the parcel that they use for the project. So let's say there's a 40-acre plot that they use half of. The remaining half is still taxed normally to the landowner as normally used and expected.
And it can still be current use if it's.
And if it's
more than
still,
10 acres.
since it's more than 10 acres, they could still pay current use. Some of them may have a house on it, that would still be getting taxed absolutely normally, nothing changes.
That would be for the leases, what about for the ones that they're buying outright?
If they're purchasing them outright, it is the same thing where if they are now gonna own it. So the portion of the project that is on that land is covered by the pilot. And then the non-project portion of the land would just be taxed normally as a standard property tax,
So the town will go in and assess it once they've done their construction?
basically.
And if they take land that is currently under current use, they would have to pay the penalty of getting it out of current use.
Yeah, so that would be the land use change tax. And at one point in time, I did all the calculations for it. Looking at the number that they show us, sorry, that's construction.
It's the
term.
97,000.
It's number 9 or something, isn't it?
Yep, number 9.
So there is a formula that they used, which I believe is the second to last packet or something. There's another set of charts in here that they used when going over the
On
process.
page
and-
5, other taxes, not current use tax.
Oh, here we go. It's the one with the yellow on it. And so this was when they went over the process with the previous select board for the original pilot. This was looking at land use change tax payments and what it would basically run for those properties in question. And the amounts basically boiled down to, they were looking, now the select board was looking at pay the entire amount of everything. They were looking at a reduced amount, but just based on the entire per acre value of the whole plot. And they settled halfway in the middle. That was used as okay, this is the amount, now we'll turn that into a same as the per megawatt amount. And then that was how it was scaled from the previous existing pilot to the current one, is just doing the percentage based on the megawatts. A couple key points here are that if everything was in current use that they were going to develop on and not under pilot, we would get a fairly decent chunk more than what we would get with the pilot. However, all of these lands are not under current use. And I was actually surprised at the amount of them that were not. Again, I wish I had that in front of me right now. I know I did look that up at some point. I don't want to spitball a percentage because that's important here. But it is not all of the properties that are actually under current use. So they would probably pay similar to or a little bit less than the amount that's in the pilot in lieu of land use change taxes for the development. But to your point, yes, that's how that would work. And they typically would have had to pay that for the lands that are in current use.
So you're saying because they're not under current use, this lowers for pilot?
It does, no, the pilot is the pilot.
Is the pilot?
I'm saying if there
yeah,
was no pilot,
it's low, yeah.
the lands that are in current use would pay a full land use change tax value.
Yes,
For only the portions of the land that get changed.
okay.
And the portions that are not in current use would of course not pay anything.
Yeah,
This is based on a slightly lower percentage than if they were paying on everything.
mm-hmm,
So we could absolutely do the figuring to come up with the, what that dollar value is, but it's pretty close. And of course is a direct upgrade from the previous. You will notice that, where is it? There is a, anyway, there is a portion in here that basically says, this can be amended for updating purposes, to update information and that sort of thing. And while it is a new pilot agreement that would replace the old pilot agreement and has been presented to us in that manner by Hopkinton Solar, because they're considering it we're updating it to include the additional property, it's already part of the project. It is actually a legally different document because of the new properties. And so that's why we're in this situation where we're actually really talking about it instead of, well, it's the expected update, let's just sign it as the select board. Trying to go through that and make sure that we have a full understanding of all of the data and pictures that are in front of us.
Does the name change have any effect on it, where they went? Is it probably not, because it's care of Granite Apollo?
Yeah, Granite Apollo basically changed their name to Hopkinton Solar.
Actually, no, I would say
Actually,
Granite
no,
Apollo
they-
changed their name to Olivewood.
Oh, right, so Granite Apollo got, sorry.
No,
took
it's
me a
fine.
second.
I'm,
Granite Apollo was the entity that first started this process and got purchased as an entire entity by Olivewood Energy.
and the reason I asked that, it's a legal binding agreement that we signed, but it's a different name, so is it?
Yeah,
It's semantics, but I'm asking the
yeah,
question.
it's, and there's another one in the back this will stay in full force and effect through sales.
I did
and
read that.
So on, and so that's
Okay.
a sale and updating the person.
so Granite Apollo is Olivewood?
Granite Apollo was fully purchased by Olivewood,
Purchased,
so
okay.
yes.
And this
Effect.
project is
So
called
that-
Hopkinton. So
Yes.
And it
the
is
pro-
still listed Hopkins and Solar first and after, so it's,
The legal entity name is Hopkinton Solar for this particular project. And the working name of it is Deer Meadow Solar. So those two are,
So why don't we get rid of Granite Apollo here? Just get rid of it.
Yeah.
that's why I was asking the question, because it still says Granite Apollo and we didn't read that out. I think we should change that.
can you make a note that we should definitely ask about that? And then Dan's question about the revenues.
If they'll provide them. They might not want to provide that.
Yeah, I mean, that is, of course, their thing, but that's basically what's in here.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
On page 5, the potential adjustment of pilot payments,
Yep.
the increase in capacity during the term of the agreement where they would increase the Webster portion, and then it goes on to say it would reduce it as well.
Mhm.
So if they do upgrades, obviously if they do repairs of a panel, that doesn't include it, wouldn't count as an upgrade. If they do storage for solar, which is certainly something that they could choose to do, have more storage availability for when as the technology continues to improve, that would be an increase or an improvement in the land.
So the closest thing that I can say on that, and we would have to double check everything with legal, but what I would be expecting is that this covers solar production. This doesn't cover storage. So storage is, of course, an additional thing that wouldn't necessarily be, and wouldn't be appropriate to be covered under the same megawatt pricing here. For the comment about increasing and reduction, if they do a repair of a panel and replace it with like in kind, nothing changes. If they do a repair of a few panels and they're better panels that are newer, we get more money. If they decide 15 years in, because this is, that's another thing that's unique about ours, is that it's a 40-year agreement. Most are only 10 or 20. If they decide halfway through that it's time to upgrade, then we get more money.
And if they choose to shut it down for whatever reason,
So
that's stop.
So they don't actually have, there's, where is it? There is, so there's the same term, let's see, construction term. So as far as the reduction in capacity, that's not we decided we wanted to shut this down, unless it is a permanent shutting down of everything. And that is a different situation, because the reduction in capacity is specific to, for example, damage caused by natural forces, operating restrictions because of a change in laws, regulations, or ordinances, etc.
So that's, I guess, where I would want to make sure is I want to make sure that I'm reading it the same way you are. If it floods down there with the brook, where we were talking about earlier, where the bridge is, just as an example,
Sure.
and it takes out 3 acres of panels,
Mhm.
are they allowed to reduce the payments based on the natural cessation of the power being?
Probably. If they decide that there is no flood mitigation and or rebuilding that they want to do, then
What if it's just
probably.
delayed for 6 months? What if it's just inoperable for 6 months?
That's not covered. They don't get to reduce for temporarily inoperable.
What's temporary?
Yeah, that's not stated in the stuff, though. I mean,
Well,
that's your interpretation.
because this is permanent, and you see that in the,
Reduction in capacity.
yeah. It will be adjusted downward based on the percentage of the Webster portion that is no longer functional, and that's in the permanent cessation portion.
Okay.
In the case of clause 3 above, this, which is, if it's all of it, then this agreement terminates.
Okay, permanent cessation, so it does say that.
They would probably have to fill out some form and present it to the select board to say that we've lost 3 acres of panels that equal 5 megawatts and it's not viable to rebuild it. And then the select board would have to agree to that. I'm stepping out of bounds before we'd ever say, no, you still owe us this amount of money.
That's kind of where I'm going, isn't it?
I would think that would have to happen. Am I wrong on that?
That would be my assumption. I don't have the legal background to
I don't
tell you
either,
for
but
sure, but that would be.
I don't
that's
believe the select board's just gonna say, okay, yeah, just give us 200,000 this year. We don't need the extra.
Yeah.
I hope not.
And if they write you a check for 200,000, you want to have something legal.
Yeah,
behind it.
they would definitely be required to provide proof that they had that reduction happen.
So, can I bring up another subject?
Please.
I don't, maybe I missed it, but I don't see anything in here about remediation, after they leave, about cleaning up or whatever.
Yeah, that is correct. The pilot is only in lieu of taxes and taxation. The cleanup portion, the remediation, or typically the shutdown type portion of it with, okay, we're done, we're leaving, that's all in the memorandum of understanding. So that is where we would either ask them to do specific things or to put up a bond of X amount for us to be able to do things if they're no longer there, et cetera.
Yeah, but, okay, so that is covered. I mean, the town is in good shape. there.
Well, we're not right now because we don't have an MOU, but that is what, as we get more of the civil engineering documentation from them, the MOU is the primary focus for this group.
Okay, all
And
right.
so we'll be working on that to, along with them and the town's hired attorney for that, and also with Hopkinton Solar / Olive Wood Energy.
So I'll go back to my original statement that this thing is fairly easy to understand and easy to, it would stand up in court, I mean, there's no arguing over what's your output, what's your gross revenue, I mean, things that they may not want to disclose or whatever.
Right. And there's no, how do we want to make the bookkeeping look? Like that doesn't exist in this pilot. And if you look at we've got a couple other pilot examples that are right after the charts. For example, this one is town of Milford with Spartan Solar. And then the one after that is the one that looks different, which is Tamworth and New England Solar Garden. You'll notice that while they don't look exactly the same way, they all function the same way. And so, for example, even the different looking one, which is New England Solar Garden, right in the middle of their second page, it's nameplate capacity times whatever. This is how we get these kinds of payments. And then the potential adjustments for pilot payments are the same. So it's basically a boilerplate document all the way through for what we've got sitting in front of us. So,
And Betsy, do you have any comments you want to add into this?
so you're right on that. It's a fairly standard process, easy to hold up to in court, and they will have seen the same thing hundreds of times.
Less lawyers' fees.
This is true. So that's kind of the details of what's in the pilot. There were a couple other concerns that have come up over time from people on previous select boards and other places regarding how this relates to the town. And so the pilot is a payment in lieu of the tax, which means that, of course, when we have, for example, the budget, we've got the money coming into our budget as revenue. So that's great. And it's easy to look at all of this and say, well, on year whatever, we're going to get X amount. That's absolutely true, 100%. The things that are harder to quantify for most folks are kind of twofold. The first I'll touch on is the master plan, and that we want in the master plan to have a more sustainable future while keeping the small town with lower populations and so on and so forth, with people more spread out. This absolutely helps to do that. The second thing is, of course, everybody wants our taxes to stay low. And this helps in that regard as well. Obviously, there's the revenue from it, which it probably wouldn't get a land use change, it probably wouldn't be taxed at its higher rate, so, you know, there's obviously a whole lot more there than we would have been getting. But there's a real key to that, in that unlike if, say, someone put in a housing development, there aren't gonna be any additional road, police, fire, or school
Right.
related uses.
Yes.
Because there's not
Which
gonna
is the most
be
expensive.
any students
Right.
here. Yes, if you look at our taxes, our local towns is about $5 on the whatever, and it's about 20 or so for 15, I think, for the school. So a lot of that goes there. And this, like, there won't be students, and we pay the operating budget of the school is done based on a divided rate per pupil, as I looked into for us. And so that's not gonna raise that portion of our school tax. So as a percentage, what we end up paying for school taxes will go down, even if we're ending up paying more, it's still percentage, it goes down for us as a town, and as individual taxpayers will pay less. The other portion of those taxes, granted they're both fairly small, but there's the county, which does theirs based on evaluation, and the state. The state just passed, and I apologize, I don't remember which bill, I think it was 64, but it was one of the House bills this past set, where anything that has, anything that is a renewable energy, I believe it's wind and solar, it might only be solar, definitely solar, but I believe both, for any sort of pilot agreement, does not pay and does not count towards what we pay for the state education tax. So we don't pay that portion as a town, and that's purely just revenue again. And then the last is, of course, the county, which, is like 1.5 or something like that. To the question of valuation, because of course there's equalization and so on and so forth. If you go through and you look at the equalization handbook, the way they have it set up is that in order to make sure that a town cannot get screwed like some of the earlier towns did when they put in wind and said, well, we don't have value in this because the pilot only pays us, a little bit, but they said, well, those particular wind towers are on the corner of your really small land, so you're a couple $1 million up. In order to prevent that problem from happening, the revaluation says, this is what you're paying in tax, this is what's being paid in taxes, and it just works backwards. So it says, if your tax rate is, let's say 20%, and it's $1,000, then your actual amount is, what's that, 20,000 or something of that nature. So, and I apologize for the math off the top of my head, but it's just working backwards to the valuation based on this, and it matches, it does that using the percent that your town is currently using for everything else. So this will not change that in any way, shape, or form for the equalization and the revaluation. So it's not like, oh, you're getting 200,000, but we're gonna treat it like you've got $6 billion worth of something, so you actually owe, 700,000. That can't possibly happen anymore because of the way they changed the law. So,
Well, I would just say that most of that land is pretty flat, and I think at some point that would be developed.
It definitely could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it will be given 30, 40, whatever. I mean, sometime in the future, that'll be developed.
Especially with we are in the largest expanding area of the US. And one of the hottest house markets,
So I'm,
not just in time, but also in location, so.
I'm happy to have, it is a clean industry in town. It's gonna, it's quiet, there's gonna be no traffic. It sounds like a good deal for the town.
And for, I would agree with that, and to add commentary to that, when we had Rick Vanderpool here, who is the environmental expert, he basically said the same thing, that the majority of this is either already cut or flat and new forest, and so is an ideal location
Yeah.
for doing this without much, if any, harm to the environmental process. And his entire report, as written, is available on our website at the top left in the links. And his presentation of that, which was 2 meetings ago, is available as a YouTube link at that same location, if you go look that up at our meetings.
Would you like to add anything, Mr. White?
I would just like to comment on your last comment, just in the spirit of understanding the impact. As long as they hold, and I have no reason to think that they won't hold to their agreement to go in through the power lines, then it does much lessen the impact, or else they would have been going right through my property.
Right.
And so that does lessen the hardness of the project. So hopefully they'll keep to that way.
Yeah, I think that's,
Yeah,
I hear you, and that's what they should do. They said they're gonna do it, and they should do it.
yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Is that something we can address in the MOU?
Yes.
That's something that can be addressed.
Yeah.
At what point do we go back to the MOU?
So we can do whatever we want as far as the MOU at this point. What Olivewood was hoping to do was to provide us with more of the backgrounds for their other reports, much like they've done for the wetlands. So the other environmental species type stuff, which was kind of covered in Rick's report, like he looked at it and went over it. But they haven't finalized all of their findings, and they haven't gotten a sign off from Fish and Game yet. So they're looking at providing all of those in individual chunks to us as the town to digest, along with, in the future, I'm gonna guess either end of the year or early next year, with more of a civil engineering style with, okay, here's where we want access roads, these are the panels, this is exactly where we plan to put fences. And at that point, they also plan to provide us with a draft MOU. And once we have the draft MOU, we have our discussions and make sure that it includes the contexts and concerns that we wanted to have addressed. And B, that's when we also trigger being able to have the retained lawyer for this being paid for and reimbursed by Olivewood for us. And so we basically open the floodgates once we get that draft. And then we go through things as much as we possibly can. Being that Olivewood has tried to work with whatever we've presented them as challenges so far, I hope that they continue to do that and present us with an appropriate MOU that takes all of that into account. It is our job to make sure they actually do.
Excuse me?
Yes.
I couldn't hear the end of that sentence.
Oh, so it is my hope that since they've been trying to address all of our concerns as we go through the process, that they will do that and present us an appropriate draft MOU.
Yeah.
But it is our job to make sure that that is an appropriate MOU and does actually address the concerns that we have had.
When do you expect that?
I don't have a timeline for it. I'm hoping that we have more of a civil engineering style thing, either by the end of the year or early next year. And then maybe a few months after that, at the very earliest, would be probably that draft MOU. We should be able to be working on, like, these are our concerns and things we want to make sure are included or adjusted in the design, which gets described by the MOU before then. But that draft MOU is a fairly decent chunk out at this point. So it looks like we have a couple questions. For example, the revenue projection, in order to look at how.
It's just gonna give us, two of them on here are done by percentage of gross revenue, and I'm not saying we should do it that way, but it gives us an idea of the first year, 204,000. What is that percentage of gross revenue? Is it 5%? Is it 2%? Is it, just, are we in the ballpark? You know, I
Well,
just,
The first year, you know, the whole project's slated for what, 75 megawatts? Or
Yeah,
68?
68 for us.
68
Yeah,
for
so
us.
the first, I'd be really surprised the first year if they get 68 megawatts. You know, the first year they may get.
First full cap, well,
So there's construction, and then there's full year of operation.
but
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the first year of operation may not be 68 megawatts.
the 68 megawatts nameplate data is what they're gonna get on the best sunshiny day when the sun's shining. They're not gonna get 68 megawatts 24 hours a day because the sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day. They're not gonna get it on a rainy day. They're not gonna get it on a cloudy day, but they're gonna get something. That was where my last comment of 12 to 15%. So that's typically over the course of a full year, they're gonna get 12 to 15% of their nameplate data
Oh, really?
is what typically. And I challenge anyone else to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty confident in that number. So they're gonna get 12 to 15% of,
Of 68?
Yes.
Okay.
over the
But-
course of the year.
And that's why it's key, and of course, as solar panels are out there and being used and generating energy, over time, they derate. So they don't produce as much in the second year, and then a little less in the third, and so on and so forth. It's not bad, but you do have to plan for and expect it.
Right.
However, that's one of the things that's great about the way the pilot is written. If we're looking at revenues, we have to expect a continually decreasing payment as the years go on. Whereas with the way that this pilot is stated, it is based on nameplate value. So whether the panels are able to produce that or not, whether there's lots of sun or not, whether it's cloudy or they just have lots of snow on them all winter, doesn't matter. It doesn't change how much they get to pay us because we only care what the sticker on the solar panel says. And if they never change the solar panels, we've got the prices right here. They'll be, by the end of the 40 years, if they're using top-notch panels, they'll be producing 75 to 80% of what they will on the first year. But if they're, which I'm pretty sure they would be using top-notch style panels, but if they're not, if they were using cheap panels, by then they'd be generating only 65 to 70% at the end of year 40. And
Panels.
cheap. But when you look at it, we don't want to be in the construct of, well, we're 30 years in and we've had, you know, inflation, our land is worth more if we can use it and we want to do something else in town, but we can't because they're here and they don't pay us anything for taxes anymore either because there's no more revenue. And this, because it's based on nameplate value, assures that that can't become a problem.
Good.
Whereas the revenue model most likely we would make a significant amount more in the first 5 or so years, probably even-ish within the 5 to 15-year mark, and then significantly less the longer the agreement continued after that.
I might add that, this is sort of an unknown. I mean, we don't know if this is gonna work out or not work out. And 30, 40 years down the road, they're gonna look back and they're gonna say, what were those assholes doing? What were they thinking? And, I mean, there's no getting around that. You're gonna, you make the best decision you can at the time, and then you stick with it.
We won't be here in 40 years.
Good point, Marty.
At least I won't be.
Hopefully some of us will. I mean, I know I'm old, but I still hope to make it that long. And so
Betsy will be. Right.
the other thing is, of course, that when you get to the end of it, the most likely thing is you renew some sort of similar thing if it's already there working, and because there's no development to keep going with. And of course, the other option is, well, we've already hit net energy zero everywhere in the world, everything is perfect, so we don't need it anymore, in which case, that's where in the MOU, we have when you remove it, you plant all of these trees and you make a payment over here and you conserve this amount, or whatever. And that's all what can go into the MOU, but that's not part of the pilot.
The other technology could change, and in 20 years, they could change out all the panels on the same footprint and double their output.
Oh, absolutely.
That's,
Well, 40 years, we get to renegotiate.
Well, in 40, but in
20, they'd double what they're paying us if they doubled their capacity.
the rate of increase has been kind of like this in chunks for how efficient panels are. So it's fairly easy to consider that in 15 years, they may they could leave it and it would be fine. And it would be generating power and they would have, a good solution and a good situation where they're making money, and so are we. But more likely what would happen is at the 15 to 20 year mark, they go, technology says, we replace these panels and it produces more than double. And
they sell the panels cheap to the town.
they sell the panels someplace or recycle them. And then whatever they put in, that new nameplate value, which is gonna be significantly higher, we instantly start making more money as a town because of this agreement. So either way, that's a pretty good look at it. And that really it kind of boils down to what your priority for the town is. If you want some sort of, not necessarily this pilot, but a pilot like this. It really boils down to your priorities. If your priorities are, don't do anything, I don't want anything to change, then you can look at it twofold, in that this prevents things like developments happening over time, or it's making something change. But chances are, if this doesn't happen, the places that would have solar panels will probably end up with housing constructs.
So do we need to take a vote or something? Or what,
So-
are we ending discussion?
Yeah, so are there any other questions or comments on this as it sits? Okay, so we're basically at a point where we can do one of two things. We can either say that we want the additional information, such as the revenue, or if you're so inclined, we could do a vote for recommending that it be signed as is or with a specific change to send that recommendation to the select board. Either one is a valid option. I don't want to try to guide us down either path, but I would be happy to hear either a yeah, I definitely want this information first, or a motion to do that?
I want the information personally. I don't think there's any reason to vote and sign this or agree to sign it tonight. I also want to say, to your point, I don't want to price them out of it where they go, no, Webster, you're too expensive, we don't want you, we'll find another town. That's not my intent. I just want to make sure Webster's getting their fair share. I don't want to do the math and say, well, this isn't even 1% of the gross revenue. And we might not get the numbers, they might not want to provide them. I don't believe they have to. But if we can get them, I would like to see the numbers. What was that, Dan?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was gonna say, you should be able to go to Milford and find that information, it's public information there, because it's already been in use to find out.
I don't know if we can go see what the company's actual revenue is.
I don't know if they have an investor relations portion, but
Unless they're a publicly traded company, they don't have to provide it.
right, but what I'm suggesting is potentially Milford knows that information. They've already been in use there. They may already have some data that you can crunch due to the similarities here.
Sure. Well, it's gonna all depend on what the rate is, really. The gross revenue is gonna depend on, I mean, a typical ISO rate is 3.5 cents per kilowatt right now. I would assume they're gonna get some sort of credits to go with that, because at 3.5%, I find it hard to believe they could develop a site like this for that money per kilowatt. So, I don't know. I don't wanna even speculate what they're gonna make per kilowatt, but it would be interesting to see, and then we'd have an idea of what percentage is this at the first year and what percentage is this at the 40 year, and we might go, that's pretty fair. Or we could go, ooh, that's not really fair, and I'd rather, let's make it 35 plus an escalator, or I'm throwing numbers, I wanna know what, that's my personal feeling.
And I think first of all, the company will be constantly renegotiating. You know, you said it's 3.1 now, you know.
That's ISO, I can pull my phone out right now and tell you what it is right this 5 minutes.
Yeah, so it's gonna change constantly, so how are you gonna know how much they're making?
So, there's credits, you're on the Rex credits, and those change, that changes all the time.
Right.
But they have to have some sense of what they're gonna make to install this solar field. I mean, they're not going into this blind.
Even if it's like a projected range.
They have to have an idea of what they're gonna
Yeah.
make over the course of however many years, whatever the payout is, to pay off the panels. Your point's well taken.
It just seems to me that they're, you know, again, all they can do is just kind of make a guess as to what they'll be making, you know, in 3 years.
They might have contracts already signed for credits, I don't know. I don't know how solar works.
I believe their power purchase agreement is either 5 or 10 years. I don't believe it's longer than that, but that's a feeling from having talked to them on things like the nature walk, as opposed to a solid being told that. I don't know if is that something that you can look up on ISO New England to find out, or no?
I don't know. I don't know on that.
But,
There again, it's private versus publicly traded.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if the company would give you that info.
And I would think-
Milford may, but.
Well, unfortunately, we've contacted many of the other towns that
Well-
have different agreements, whether it's with Olivewood or other companies, and most of them haven't provided us much of anything, or haven't wanted to talk to us about it.
This size of this project means that they have to go before the site evaluation committee.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely.
And at that point, we're an interested party.
Mhm.
We get to sit at the table there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can ask those questions at that point, certainly.
Oh, absolutely. But at that point, you would be expecting to have an MOU and a pilot already kind of in place. So it gets a little bit tricky if you're trying, like, you don't really want to wait until then if it's something that you care about.
Well,
So,
I'll go back and I'll say that I'm in favor of this. I'm in favor of this agreement.
what is your feeling on this?
can't say. This is not my area of expertise.
Okay. And
I'd say let's go ahead with this. I think the 3,000, I mean, at first I thought, how come it's 3,000, not 3,500? It certainly looks like it's particularly with the escalation. I mean, it sounds like a really good deal. I mean, again, who knows, you know, in, 30 years, people might be saying, oh, are they crazy?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think it seems to me it's reasonable. And like you said, the alternative is, if we had a housing development there instead of this, this is just such a good deal.
Yeah.
And particularly it's doing something very good,
yeah,
so.
and
Yeah, and I was kind of on the fence until I saw these comparison of these numbers, that first sheet we looked at. And that made me think that, well, this isn't so bad. I mean, it's sort of in line with other things. I like the escalation clauses. Made me feel reasonably good about it.
And particularly since it's 40 years. I mean, some of these towns have been doing 10 years. I mean, this is.
most of them are 10 or 20 at the most.
Yeah.
Ours is exceptional being 40.
Yeah. So I'd say let's go with it. I mean, I know there's no rush
Right.
for it, but we can at least get this out of the way and then we can work with the move.
Okay. If that's the way that you feel, then
Well, how do you feel?
I think that this is reasonable, and the way that I look at a pilot for this is, even if this is not, let's say it should be 3,500 instead of 3,000, if once we see the revenue and we go, well, we think it should probably be 3,500 with an escalator, or 3,250 with an escalator, or whatever. Even if that were the case, so yes, the town could potentially do better. I think it would be a hard-fought portion of that, because Olivewood has told, there's two things here. One is Olivewood has told us several times that they're happy to renegotiate the shape of the pilot. So whether that's the lower up front with a higher escalator, or more up front with an escalator that kicks in after 10 years, or whether it's a flat fee with no escalator. They're happy to renegotiate any of that based on what's here, but they don't want to change the overall output amount. The second portion is, would I rather see either no tax income and no additional environmental help from offsetting the carbon and so on of the solar? Or would I rather see, we're probably not going to see the entire land developed in 20 years, you never know, but let's say another 10 to 20 houses. And
50 houses.
well,
I'm sorry.
I would say that that's where it would eventually get, but probably not in 10 to 20 years
Yeah.
or so. And so I look at it more from a point of, I think this is the better option for the town, even if it doesn't end up being the, let's squeeze every cent out of them option. Now granted, I do want to squeeze every cent out of them, because every cent that we
That's-
get from them means I don't have to pay it as a tax.
That's why we elected you.
But fair enough, I did run on knowing the taxes and where things go and trying to make the budget as small as possible. So, that's it. But if you look at the long-term picture for the town, which I try to do, something like this is really solid, really significant, and it helps solidify that things won't change rapidly in the town for, the amount that we pay towards the school tax and so on and so forth, because, well, we got 5 new families that moved in with 3 kids. And that would drastically increase the amount of school tax that we as a town pay individually. So, because there's so few students here to start with, doing that changes almost 15% or so. So if you wanted to see the largest portion of your tax rate raised by 15 to 20%, have a few families move in with a few kids. And it happened. So this helps to prevent against that. It also helps to preserve that area and to bring back more of the environmental aspect of some of the things that we are losing in the area, like the bats and so on. And pollinators especially. So things of this nature help that. And that's not the pilot itself, but as a project, I look at it as this is kind of a step towards allowing that to happen. So that's kind of my whole feel on it. I want every cent we can get out of them. But at the same time, if it's not every possible, squeeze them for every possible cent, then maybe this gets renewed at the end of the 40 years, or maybe it actually lasts through the 40 years, or we don't drive them out of business, etc.
We'll ask Marty in 40 years.
So,
When I'm 100 and, let's see, I'd be, well, only 110.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
So,
well.
yeah.
so I would classify it as, I am for this pilot agreement, and I am not against taking a look at the revenues to see if these numbers actually make the most sense to us.
So, well, let me, if we put off and go chase down some figures, then do at the next meeting, do we vote on this?
Yeah, I would say that if we wanted to do it that way, what would make the most sense is to have Russ and or Dana request those figures from them. And if they provide them, great, and we look at them at the next meeting. And then we can provide a recommendation for the pilot to be signed or not based on those numbers, or to request that the select board start to try renegotiating based on those numbers.
I hate putting things off. Me too. It's
Excuse me,
like,
Craig?
I don't like putting things off.
Putting things off.
Yeah, I mean, David sort of made the case for, that it may change the figures a little bit. It's not gonna change the figures a lot, if I heard you correctly. And I think that's probably right. So I'm in favor of voting on this tonight.
All right. Well, if you want to make a motion to do that.
I move that we vote to accept this pilot as written, with the clarification on the name OED Granite Apollo LLC.
I'll second it.
All right. Well, we'll do the roll call then. Let's start on this end. Marty?
I'm in favor of it.
I'm against it.
I'm in favor of it.
I'm in favor.
Can I hear why you are against it?
I just wanted to, if they'll provide it, I wanted to see the gross revenue.
Okay.
And then we could do some calculations and figure out the first year through the 40th year, what percentage of their growth revenue this payment is. There was a couple other solar companies in here. One did 5%, one did 10%. I think 10 might be a little high, but that would, as Dave said, I'd take all we can get. Just to see where we're at compared to the gross revenue. That's why I'm against it. That's the only reason. From the beginning, I'm not saying this is unfair, and for all the reasons everybody else has stated, I am for this project. It's environmentally friendly. It takes up space that houses could provide. I'm okay with waiting a little bit on it.
So just for my own sake, it would be fair to say that you are for the pilot agreement, but not approving it at this point because you want more data.
I want more data. That's why I'm not voting yes right now.
Mhm.
And so that leads us to you.
Well, I think what you're saying is good. But I'll go along with this.
Okay. So let's see, 1, 2, 3. So it is a 4-1 vote to recommend that this pilot be signed by the select board.
I also think we should continue with getting the data that we can,
Yeah.
gross revenue data, and see if we screwed up. Okay.
I would suggest that we do get that, that we do request that, because I don't believe that we will be able to put this on the immediate agenda of the select board. And I would like to be able to look at those figures, if they will provide them, when the select board goes over it.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, if the numbers turned out to be wildly off, you know, then, yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, before it goes to the select board, you know.
Good, that's all I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
I just
so
wanna
I
make sure
think-
we're gonna
I
figure
think
it.
we're saying, we're approving it for the select board, you know, but if there is something that comes up, they can always say, whoa, wait a minute.
I believe we can say whoa, whoa, whoa until
Yeah.
the three of you sign the agreement, correct?
Yeah.
Because we're
And there's-
nothing more
and
than
there's-
an advisory committee
Right.
anyways.
And there's no rush, right?
Right.
I mean, it's-
And
it's
so
way down the line.
to
before we
clarify,
get it.
Absolutely.
this absolutely was a motion for the subcommittee to recommend this pilot to the select board.
right,
Yeah.
It is not to say that this pilot is accepted by the town.
Mhm.
right.
Just to clarify for everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
So
And
that was,
so we're gonna have another solar meeting in a month, right?
that is the expected intent.
And then we'll take a look at, see if we can get some numbers and take a look at that. And then
You have a
after
date for
that,
that?
We have set the schedule as the last Tuesday of every month.
so,
So I don't have the date in front of me because I'm not looking at a calendar.
The
so
28th.
then,
He says it's the 28th.
so after that next meeting, then we can present this to the select board, right?
Sure.
I mean, we don't have to present this to the select board right now.
Okay, so if you want to do it that way, might I suggest that you write the draft letter to send to be presented to the select board, and at the next meeting, provided there is or is not data, then the subcommittee can sign it.
Okay.
I can't attend on the 21st.
Isn't it 28?
I believe
28th
he
is
said
the
it was
last.
the 28th.
28th
It was
is
the
the-
last, it's the last Tuesday of the month?
That's the 21st. September 21st.
I have the 28th.
Oh, you're right. Okay. Thank you, David.
Does that work for you?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Did I have it? I don't have the agenda in front of me anymore. Was there anything else? I think that was it.
I think that's it.
All right. Anybody have any other further business or comments about the solar stuff that they want to cover right now? All right. Any further public comment?
Thank you for allowing me to ask the questions I did.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, you did a good job.
So in that, I would love to hear a motion to close at 8:27.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Have a great night, everybody.
All right,
You
thanks.
too.
Well done, David.
Thank you for coming.
I try to keep it, everything